Well, greetings, everyone. I am very excited today to be in conversation again with my friend, Dawn Baumann Brunke, who is an extraordinary writer. And we're going to be talking today about her latest book, Shadow Animals, which is an incredible book. But before we launch into talking about it, let me just give you a brief sense of her bio, and then I'll list a more full bio below the video. But Dawn is a writer who specializes in the areas of healing, metaphysics, and spirituality. She has published over 36 interviews with people including Greg Braden, Carolyn Meese, and many others. She has written many books, and I'm just going to say my favorites that everyone should read. Shapeshifting with Our Animal Companions. Loved that one. Dreaming with Polar Bears. And Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake. So it is great to be back in conversation with you. And one of the things that I find extraordinary with you is not only your gifts in animal communication, but your incredible, deep journey of exploring dreams and how much they guide us and teach us. And that all of that comes through in your Shadow Animals book as well.
Yeah, and Dreaming with Polar Bears too. Yeah, I've never really written a book about dreams, but dreams are in all of my books, and I do. Yes. I just resonate very much with dreams, and it amazes me that we're not talking more about dreams, right? I mean, even as a little kid, I was just so fascinated by these stories we told ourselves or that we were privy to in the evening, and it's just. I grew up in a culture or a family that didn't really honor dreams, as many of us did, I think, but as we said, all this stuff is coming up. And I think there's more people who are valuing their dreams and the wisdom and insights and little helps and advice they give us, right? It's just fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I think they teach us about aspects, which we're going to get into with this book, but they show us aspects of ourselves that we're needing to face and work through. But I also feel like there are those dreams that are guidance dreams where we're really getting assistance from other realms.
Other realms, other dimensions, other aspects of ourselves, it's fascinating. Yeah, it really is.
So I am excited to talk about your Shadow Animals book in part. And just before we got on, I was saying, I think this is perfect timing to do this. I mean, we're both recording this at the time of the full moon.
Right.
And we're also talking about this book at the time that Pluto has just moved into Aquarius and is squaring the lunar nodes and is particularly targeting the South Node in Scorpio. And I truly believe that part of the meaning of that transit that's going to be going on now for a number of months is that we need to face the shadow aspects of ourselves in order to heal, in order to move in new directions. And that is so much the theme of your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before we dive into it, can you talk a little bit about how you decided to write this book?
Well, I think I've always been interested in shadow, in the sense that what don't we see about ourselves? What don't we know about ourselves? Maybe that's why I like dreams so much, because they shed light on that often. And the book before this that you mentioned, Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake, was inspired by a dream of meeting this ancient archetypal snake who told me he had lost his tail. Tale, his story, the story of Snake. And that really started me. It resonated deeply, spoke to me deeply. And I read so much about snakes, talked to so many snake people, did a lot of research into the history of snake, where in ancient times, snake was very much venerated, considered this wise animal, the wisest of all the animals, right? Its eyes were always open. In ancient India, it was a mentor and advisor to gods and goddesses. Ancient Greek too. One of the earliest versions of Zeus is as a snake. So there's all of this rich information. In the East, the notion of Kundalini snake, right? That sleeping serpent at the end of the spine, at the bottom of the spine, right, base of the spine, that moves up the chakras and allows awakening. So how did we go from this, amazing relationship with Snake as this wise advisor to one in which, we contracted, huh? We began to fear Snake
and demonize Snake.
And demonize Snake along with the goddess. It was so interesting that this happened around the same time that, the male sky gods were being honored, and hierarchies and separation of humans and nature. All of this was happening, right? And Snake became demonized. It became a monster we had to slay. So anyway, it occurred to me through all of this, wow, Snake is this amazing shadow animal. It's this animal that we really collectively, in general, fear and dislike. And at the end of that book, I just wanted to write about other shadow animals because I knew there were more. And I knew the benefit of working with a shadow animal because I lived with 2 snakes, and I just talked to so many snake people and learned so much and grew so much by really kind of immersing myself in all things snake. And Snake really became an ally to me. And that's one of the main things that I wanted to talk about, is how we can look at the animals that we're afraid of or uncomfortable with and kind of find that counterpart in ourselves. And the more we work with that, the more we learn about those animals, we can shift fear to fascination, because there is so much that's fascinating about Snake or any other animal, really. And then once we do that, once we face that, I'm kind of giving shadow work here, really quick go through, but once we face that shadow, that self or that animal can become our ally, can become our advisor, our guide, our helper. And I think the best thing is we lighten up in the process. We start to release those old holds and those old obstacles and small ways of thinking, and we just expand. So it's fun. It feels good. Well, I think it's fun when I come through it, right? When you're in shadow work, it can be a challenge. I don't want to make light of that, because it is challenging, because we're looking at all the things that we don't kind of want to see about ourselves, right?
But I think in such a great way, you're describing the process then of when we do face the shadow, we reclaim those parts of ourselves that we've disowned, and we step into more wholeness, and there's more joy in wholeness and more freedom.
More freedom, more fun. Yeah, it's a weird, tricky thing, isn't it? Because shadow holds those things that we fear, that we don't want to see, that we've shoved down into our subconscious, into our unconscious. And, we do this individually as well as collectively, right? And then when we're willing to face that, it comes up. And I think when we do see our shadow and do reclaim it, as you say, integrate it, I think shadow also has gifts, and we realize underneath that shadow, the reason we put it away was because of this thing that we maybe didn't feel worthy of. I've come to get this theory. This is kind of late. I didn't really say it in my book, but my working theory is that the core of shadow, it really is fear. And it's fear of our own power. We're all that. And that can be scary, especially in societies where we like to be told what to do. I mean, in general, right? I don't, but
some of us, not others of us.
A lot of people. But that's really how that whole, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago started. Of, we had all these hierarchies telling people what to do, how to think, how to do. We're still influenced by advertising and, the shows we watch and kind of the moralistic things we have. So where am I going with this? At the core of shadow, I think, is a fear of our own power. And when we really get down there and reclaim that, that is a huge breaking up. I think of it as crusties breaking up, you know, and we're just so much more open and alive. And you start seeing the people who really are carrying that energy, the light that they're shining, you know, and it's that's what we were talking before we started. You know, I think there is, we're going through a lot of stuff, a lot of hard stuff, a lot of challenges. But I think there's also this huge wave of opening and of sharing and of moving on kind of to the next way of being, which is very different from our old way of being, right? Yeah.
Well, and you talk, and this is part of what I really loved in your book, Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake, is you really talk about, as you were just saying earlier, how the snake became demonized as we moved into this new cultural period, the patriarchal period.
Right.
I mean, serpent snake is the oldest, most revered image of the great goddess.
Right.
So part of what's powerful in your book is you are describing how things become, certain animals get projected with our shadow, either because of our individual trauma experiences, but more often because of our collective cultural trauma experiences, and how then when we shift into a new time frame, certain animals get labeled with that negativity because that's something that's now being repressed.
Right.
So I think not only as we face our shadow are we reclaiming our own gifts, but we're reclaiming our memory of who we are as humanity and reclaiming some of those pieces that we've lost.
Right. And our relationship with animals and plants and each other, right? And the planet itself. Yeah, for sure. It's a almost like a decalcifying, of old, hard, small ways of seeing things that got projected onto us, or that we accepted, or that we believed, and it's kind of busting that all apart. And you know, like you said, it's going into freedom. It's going into a greater awareness of how we are all interconnected. And again, to me, it just feels like this lightness, this. And I don't mean that color-wise, I mean it vibrational-wise, It's just a finer vibration of joy.
Well, and it is also moving into higher consciousness when we move into more wholeness and are no longer caught in that inner polarization and splitting off parts of ourselves.
It's my dog.
Your little dog companion is leaving. She doesn't want to talk about shadow animals anymore.
I think that salmon just wants to be above my head for some reason. But you know, salmon, I don't talk about salmon.
Wisdom.
It's wisdom and returning home. You know, it's the salmon goes through the challenges, right? Of going out to the ocean and then coming back to its birthing place. And there's a lot of challenges for salmon, you know, rocks and bears and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Well, circling back to what you were just saying a few minutes ago, do you think, you know, as I was rereading your book and looking at some of these different animals that have been, you know, seen as, you know, the animals that we fear or we resist, spider, snake, rats, bats.
Yeah.
I mean, many of these animals both are about the energy of transformation, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
But do you also feel like it was when we moved into the patriarchal period and began to disconnect from our deep relationship with the earth that we began to project our own shadow onto animals as a way to try to both feel our sense of superiority and control, but also project all those aspects of ourselves that we wanted to disown onto them?
Yeah, that seems so true, doesn't it? Yeah.
So that maybe now that as we're moving into the Aquarian age and reconnecting with the earth, coming back into right relationship with the earth, that will support us in seeing the animals more clearly in who they are.
Exactly. Seeing them for who they are rather than through our lens of projection, separation. Um, yeah, instead of demonizing or making them bad. We like to do that with humans too, don't we? And I think we're going through we're going through a lot of that. And it's turbulent and it's challenging. And I think maybe that is why we did it with animals, because it's like goat. I have a big chapter about goat and how we kind of demonized goat. The original goat god was Pan, the god of nature, right? And through the ages, the church and society wanted things in order. It wanted us to be controlled, really, is what it is, right? And Pan was just not about that. Pan was about drinking and having fun in the forest, and just being very fluid and open, and the villagers loved Pan, right? The church did not. How can we have control? So Pan, the great goat god with his horns and his hoofs, that started over the centuries kind of being projected onto goat itself. What's our standard visual of a demon or of the devil? Something with horns and hooves and hairy, and it has to be civilized. It has to be kept in, right? So
or sacrificed, as in the scapegoat.
Yeah, and that's another aspect, isn't it? Where way back when, one of the things people would do in villages is kind of give their sins, write them down or say them onto the religious figure who would put them onto goat. And then goat was sent out into the wilderness, taking away all our sins. When I first read that, I thought, wow, that's a smart way to deal with shadow, isn't it? I mean, get rid of it. But that's the problem. That's how we create shadow, is by trying to separate ourselves, right, from our sins, from what we fear, from what we judge as being, bad or whatever it is, whatever our projection is, whatever we don't want to see about ourselves. So let's send scapegoat out, and we do that routinely to people now, don't we? And we do it very publicly, and it's so mean-spirited how we do that. So yeah, I mean, reclaiming our scapegoats, that would be a great personal exercise. And that's what I talk about in the book, right? Reclaiming kind of our scapegoat and who we project on, and being more aware of when we are projecting onto individuals as well as animals.
Well, there's a great quote from your book where you say we tend to marginalize what we disown. So we take those aspects of ourselves that we can't face, and then we project it onto an animal or another person, and then we want to distance from them or marginalize them or destroy them.
Right.
And you do talk at the end of the book a lot about that whole sense of othering and how we're doing that with each other as humans, and really being destructive to each other by seeing the other person as the other who needs to be feared or destroyed.
Yeah. Demonized, put away, whatever it is. Yeah, it's rough. And there's all kinds of, because sometimes those others really do things that are inappropriate, but so there's all kinds of, we're a mixed bag, aren't we? We're just such a mixed bag, humans are. And, but yes, just to back to the point is, what part of us does that represent? What part of us does that speak to? What person do we really, really dislike? Where is that in us? Where is that? I have a whole chapter on A Dream with Donald Trump, because for a long time he was he's a big shadow, he's a collective shadow for many. And it wasn't until I had a dream where he came to dinner, and something transformed in that dream. Something, I kind of got in touch with that aspect within myself, that arrogant, brash. This is how I'm seeing him. Okay, I'm not saying how he is, even though he is a little bit like that arrogant, brash. What is it that I don't like about him? We can do this with anything, any figure. What is it that I don't like about that person? And really write it down and get it all out. And then where is that within me? Can I feel that part within me? can I sit down and have dinner with that part? What can I learn here? And I think a compassion grows. And it doesn't mean that we excuse that person's actions in the real world necessarily, or in animals. There's animals that are, they'll hunt humans, and that's how they are, right? And that's how individuals are. And so I think it's a coming home of acknowledging that those are our projections and that those are our belief system. And that's what's holding us. And that's the good news. If we can feel where our emotional holds are, then we can do something about them, and we can sit with them, and we can acknowledge them and begin to lighten them up, and then we don't have those triggers anymore.
Well, and I think what you're describing too is then we're able to see ourselves in our wholeness. And then we're able to be more clear in seeing the other person for who they are in their wholeness. Because part of the tragedy when we're projecting these disowned parts of ourselves onto other people, then they become all bad.
Right.
And we try to hold the sense of being all good. Yeah. And then we're caught in that polarization, and we're not seeing ourselves clearly, and we're not seeing the other person in their wholeness and in their complexity.
Yeah, I agree completely. And there is a shadow side to being all good, to being too good. There's stuff that we're holding onto about that. So yeah, it's about balance, isn't it? It's about acknowledging all those divergent selves within us. I think helping them and helping ourselves, let's just talk about it as a community, to find balance. There's sometimes when our little bully needs to come out and kind of speak up, right? And there's times when, the more compassionate self is welcome, and giving everybody kind of their time when it's appropriate. Here's another aspect of it. The more shadow selves we kind of reclaim and integrate, the larger we are, the more expansive we are. And we have access to all those selves who can help us. And we really are a collective in that sense, right? And yeah, it's a dance then. It becomes more of a fun dance with all of ourselves rather than I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you're saying. It reminds me of the arch training program that I do that's really about working with the medicine wheel and coming to that realization that we have all these parts of ourselves, but as we bring them into consciousness, eventually we can come to the center of the medicine wheel, and then we can draw on those parts of the self from a conscious place. When we're not really aware of these different facets of ourselves, or we're disowning shadow aspects of ourselves, we tend to be acting more from an unconscious place, or like you said, getting triggered or being reactive, or actually being controlled by those shadow parts that we don't want to see and admit that we have.
Right.
So we actually have more freedom to act in clear, conscious ways when we reclaim those parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I think clarity is a big part of it. Acceptance, and then we have clarity. And there's just no psychic stickiness about those cells coming up and helping and speaking. And yeah, it becomes very beautiful, doesn't it? Very fluid and very elegant. And there's no, self-deprecation. There's no aggrandizing, all of those things. We don't have those extremes anymore. So it's, as you say, you're in the center of the medicine wheel, and living from that space. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more. It did strike me as really interesting how many of the animals that we tend to demonize are animals that carry that theme of transformation, or life, death, rebirth, like the serpent,
right?
Like the bats.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think that speaks to a collective fear we have of being in that in-between space, being in the liminal. That's kind of where we are right now, isn't it? We're leaving that one paradigm, moving into another. We don't really know where we are. So a lot of people, I think, are very uncomfortable with the mystery, with what's in between, where we don't really have that, that solid structure that kind of tells us what to do. We're used to that in our society. And I go like this because it's a box, right? It's a way of seeing things. And that can be helpful to some extent. But when we're in that liminal where we don't know where we're moving to, we don't know what's happening between, end of life, going into death, going into a new life. All of that is just very fluid. And I think if we're not in our center in that can be really scary. That can be really, really frightening. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of animals that we kind of collectively make shadow have to do with that. Yeah, have to do with transformation or life and death or rebirth. Bat is a big one about rebirth. And bat really is a lot about kind of being in that liminal state, the way it sleeps and puts its wings around itself and is kind of in that cocoon in the dark. There's a lot about bat that's kind of shady. They live in caves. Some of them like gargoyles, so
well, and the darkness. It seems like it's interesting that I think this is more true in these last 5,000 years of the patriarchal period, that we fear the darkness and we fear death.
Yeah.
And so we want to have this illusion that we won't die and that we are in control and that we are secure. So we resist any of these animals that are calling us to face what's in the darkness and that death rebirth process.
Yeah. Think of all the animals live under the ground. They're probably almost all collective shadow animals in a way. I just kind of thought of that, right? I mean, because they're not on the surface. They're kind of not seeing what's going on down there. That's an uncomfortable feeling, right? So that would be shadowy.
Well, and symbolic of what's beneath our conscious awareness, what's beneath the surface.
What's living in the subconscious, what's living in the basement,
Let's talk in terms of that about rats. I was fascinated by your chapter on rats and how rats are, one of the things that I love that you do in the book is that you really encourage people to get to know these animals that they fear, to find out about them, to really get a sense of what they are truly like versus our projections onto them. But rat was really interesting in terms of how radically different it is from how most people perceive rat as being.
How radically different, huh?
That too.
Yeah, I think we have a general, uncomfortableness about rats. They're dirty. They're sneaky. They get under all kinds of things. They cause plagues when really they don't. It's a great collective shadow animal, right? And rats are so smart. I've never lived with a rat, but I've spoken with so many people who did live with rats, and they're just like known as so smart and funny. And there's even a little article in that chapter about a scientist who discovered that rats laugh, and that
that they can be tickled.
They can be tickled. That was it. Yeah, but they squeal, right? They have a response to that. So, it's so interesting. Rats have been with us for so long. They've always been following humans, right? They've kind of, the ancient trade routes and when we have food, humans are into the food thing. And so it's a great place for rats to be, right? So what is it about rat? Why do we fear rats so much? What is that? What do you think? Why do we fear rats?
Well, you made a point, and I thought that really resonated with me, that they may mirror back to us our problems with overpopulation, with pollution, with the chaos that we create around us. And we don't want to look at that, so we project it onto them, and they're right there with us. So we see them as the carriers of that, but it's really
carriers of disease
and we're the carriers of those.
Sexuality and proliferation and all that kind of stuff. That's why it's a good collective shadow animal, because it does, you're right, as you say, it shows us what we don't want to see about ourselves, and to sit with that. There's something sneaky about rat, that that speaks to something sneaky in us. And I know I talked about the Pied Piper of Hamelin and that whole story of how, well, we don't need to go into all the details, but there was something about humans where in the end they didn't pay the piper, right? They didn't. He got rid of the rats, and so they didn't pay them. And there's something I think about rats where we don't pay. What should we call it? Proper attention, clarity,
Mm.
and there's something that turns. Am I making sense here? I'm kind of saying it in an odd way, but there's something that turns about that, as in the humans in that mythic story, and then they have their children taken away from them, their future generation, because they're kind of stuck there in that space of trying to get away with something. That's a projection on rat too, isn't it? They kind of get away with things. They steal our stuff. They get away with things. When in fact, rats are great, recyclers. Yeah, they take stuff that we discard, our garbage, and they make cozy little homes. And
They're actually very resourceful.
So that's the bright side of rat. What if we saw that? Rats are great repurposers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like we then, it is a way that we take some of the shadow aspects of our culture and put them onto rat, and refer to people that are causing us difficulty as, oh, that rat.
Yeah.
And yet it's really, again, such a disconnection from the true nature of the animal itself. And to me, part of what's sad, and I think this is part of what you get into in the last chapter of the book, if we take enough time to be in relationship with these animals, if we take enough time to be in relationship with each other and those we see as different from us, then we actually begin to see how similar we are and how connected we are, and no longer fear each other. But the more we're in a culture of disconnection, the more we can get caught in these projections.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. So you sit with rat, and instead of seeing disease and swindling or pulling away or, all that kind of stuff, and we see repurposing, or we see the art, which is an anagram of rat, huh? We see the art of rat, and we see its ability to challenge us in some ways to see ourselves, right? There is something about rat that, and let's just also note that this isn't true in all cultures, right? There's other cultures that really value rat, and they saw rat as, I think it's one of the Asian cultures, they're a symbol of abundance and a symbol of, where there's rat, there's a lot of food. So they become looked upon in that way. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is, and yet it's another projection in a way. So I think the theme that you're really highlighting is how important it is that we see each other and these animals in their wholeness and in the truth of who they are.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, Heather. I think you're exactly right. To see the animal in itself, with all, just to see humans with all our pluses and minuses, with all our divergent, selves. Rats are that way too, and as are all animals, right?
Well, and as you were saying at the very beginning, we're all interconnected. We really are actually all a part of cosmic consciousness. We're all just different expressions of that.
Yeah.
So when we can realize we're actually all one, then there is nothing to fear. These are just different expressions of that creative consciousness of the cosmos.
Yeah. We're on the planet of diversity in the sense of like all of these different aspects. There's just so many, and yet we're all connected, as you say, with a cosmic consciousness, a collective consciousness, deeper than collective, isn't it? It's kind of a deep inherent connection with all beings, and with the planet, and with the plants, stars. We could keep going, huh? But yeah,
Something else you were talking about in the book, which I thought was interesting, is, sort of mythic animals and monsters and hybrids,
Mhm,
half human, half animal that we
mhm.
then become terrified of. And I found that section of the book really interesting because if you trace back to more ancient cultures before the patriarchal period, often the deities were these hybrids, part
Yeah,
animal, part
yeah.
human, because they were realizing these qualities in animals that, and that's very much of the shamanic path, these
Mhm,
qualities in animals we want to connect with and integrate within
mhm,
ourselves.
mhm.
Instead of projecting our shadow onto them, we want to connect with their strengths and gifts and claim that as part of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And there's so many really ancient images of gods and goddesses as part animal, part deity, right? And that's such an interesting thing. Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's exactly what that is. Yeah.
But it's interesting how you talk about these animals that come from our imagination or come in the dream time, nightmares.
Hmm.
Interesting that they're called nightmares.
Hmm. Isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, etymologically, that has nothing to do with horses. And yet, there's something about a nightmare that is horse-like, isn't it? Some kind of it's this fear that kind of runs away with you, or that takes you to some unexpected places, and and yeah, and that's fertile area for to look at our shadow, right?
Mm.
All of our nightmares and our even our night our now they're daymares, right? Because all you have to do is turn on the news. What triggers you? If you want to know what your shadow is, what triggers you? That's just it's all available, right?
Well, and I do think with this transit with Pluto squaring the South Node in Scorpio, all those things that we've kept repressed culturally, all of those shadows and nightmares are really right on the surface right now,
I know
which
everything's
it
coming.
can feel tumultuous and frightening. But if we realize, oh, this is coming up so that we can face our shadow aspects and heal and work it through,
Yeah,
then
and
there's
I
enormous
think
possibility in that.
yeah, I think it's happening quicker, don't you? Do you experience that? It's
Yes.
just happening so quick, and the more you do it, the more you kind of acknowledge that uncomfortable feeling and sit with it and allow it to kind of move through you. And you lighten up, and it becomes easier to do. And I really do think at this point in my life, it is there's a funness to it. There's a to feel, I'm triggered by that. Why is that? And so it's a sense of curiosity, and it's a sense of, okay, where am I holding that, and what does that feel like, and breathing into it. There's a lot about breath right now that just seems so important, and finding those holds, and the other aspect of it is, all the truths are coming up too. As much as so many people don't want to, politicians in general and big pharma and all those people don't want to look at it, it's coming up. Everything's kind of burbling to the surface. And, how long are you going to deny it for? You're going to have a rough ride if you're in denial. You really are, I think. Um, so,
Well, and I think that denial is just another way of trying to have that sense of illusion of control.
exactly, exactly.
And that part of what you were saying earlier is we are in such a liminal time right now
Yeah.
where we have to let go of that longing for control and
Mhm.
be in the transformational process
Yeah.
and trust that this is actually guiding us to heal and move into more wholeness and more balance.
Yeah, and that's the trick, isn't it? We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So to me, this liminal period feels very fluid, and very much kind of just needing to go with the flow and to know your center, but at the same time, kind of be buoyed along, huh, with these different waves that come. And to me, centering, anchoring, grounding, so key right now. Breathing fully, healing whatever we can, through there's so many possibilities: sound medicine, energy medicine, whatever speaks to you, whatever calls to you, and just moving with that, and then helping other people to move with that. Because like we've said, it's going to be a bumpy ride for some people, and when it's a death, we're going through a death of this old structure, this old paradigm, and those people who are invested in that are that's so maybe we have compassion, compassion for those people, because it is rough for them, for a lot of people. Yeah.
So, what other steps would you encourage people to take to be working this, to be facing their fears and the shadow aspects of themselves, to be on that path of healing instead of getting caught in fear?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think it's being aware of what triggers me, being aware of what feels scary, what feels sad, what makes me anxious, what makes me feel depressed. Don't do it all at once. That's too much, but little by little, right? What is it? Why is that person in the grocery store really irritating me? It can be that simple, and okay. And then maybe later you sit with that a little bit. I mean, I'm a big fan of sitting with the uncomfortable emotions, and maybe because I've done it for a while, but to me, that mode works really well. So I'm feeling, where is that irritation inside me? Oh, it's kind of like right here by my heart. Okay. What does that feel like? Again, I think if you can go into the emotional feeling of it, that's kind of a better way than thinking. Thoughts can come later, but I feel like the emotion is kind of the magnetic hold, right? So if we go into that,
Or also tuning into where you're feeling that in your body. I
where are
think
you
that can
feeling in your
be very
body? What does
helpful.
it feel like? Really, kind of, is it a harsh pain? Is it a squishy, squished in pain?
Constricting.
Constricting pain. That's the word. Sharp. Whatever. What is it? What does it feel like? And the more you go into that, the more you feel it. To me, I've just developed this practice by feeling it, by really feeling it, then it starts to kind of dissipate. And I don't do it with the agenda of, oh, if I feel it hard enough, it'll dissipate. No, I go into it as a mystery. Here's another thing you could go. What does this have to tell me? Pain. What do you have to tell me? That sounds weird, but it's helpful.
Yes,
What do you have
absolutely.
to tell me? What does this speak to? Does it speak to some part of my childhood or my teenage years? I just had this incredible massage yesterday, and I've been working with this woman for ages, and she was working on a part of my hip, and all of these old images of high school and of being really afraid to. I really did not like speaking in public, and so to get up and to do a report in school, in high school. So anyway, they were all held there. It was so amazing. By going into that muscle, she's releasing these old holes. That's what we're doing, when you're looking at what triggers you, you're focusing on where that is in your body, and you're kind of like, sometimes it's a memory, sometimes our body just shakes or shivers or releases in that way. Sometimes there's no words. Sometimes there isn't a memory, all of those things. There's no one individual way, I don't think, it happens in different ways. So being organic, going with that flow again, but really deepening into that. And then you'll either sigh or you'll release, or, you'll just feel it gone. And when it's gone, it's gone. That hold isn't there anymore. So what happens? The energy can move through that space better. We don't have those old aches in our hips or wherever they are, right? The electricity, our pranic juices are moving great, and we feel better. So it's no longer an obstacle,
Yeah, and some of what you're describing so beautifully, and again, it's some of what we incorporate in the Arch program, is that you then are in your witness self instead of being controlled by those triggers and just caught in unconscious reactivity. You're observing yourself and what's coming up and taking the time. And I think that's so important what you're saying about taking that time and space to be in the reflective process and asking, tuning into that trigger or that feeling and asking what it's about, to be able to open to more conscious awareness of what it is. And like you said, then when we reclaim it, it's no longer blocking us or controlling us or constricting us. Then we're able to be more free in understanding what that's about and healing it and integrating it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is what we're needing to do in this time, individually and collectively. And I think, as you said, we're in a time that's accelerating in terms of how we can work that process if we open to it.
That's the good news. I do. I feel like it's happening so much faster. And if it's about showing up, isn't it? It's about being present to those things. And if you're willing to show up and be present with, oh, my, this is hurting, and sitting with that. Yeah, yeah, I think it does go a lot quicker. I've just noticed that over the past year, a couple of years. It's just so much faster. And then we have it may lead to other things, which is fine. We have many many holes in the body, right, that we can lighten up and that we can move through, and then maybe we do it collectively too. I think the more
Mm.
people do this individually, the more we can do it collectively. And we're kind of, I think there's some people working collectively like that. We still have this old idea of how we got to fix it, new laws or new this or new, form these groups. And sometimes that's helpful, but I think it really is more emotional. So how can we go into the collective hold of an emotion? And sometimes it's by a lot of people feeling it in a group or in meditating, maybe at a medicine wheel, and then kind of working with that. And
Mhm.
it does have a byproduct on other people who are not even doing it. They'll be affected by it because there's a field, right? There's this,
Yeah, the morphogenic field. Because
yeah.
as we heal, then we're spreading that healing energy. And as we heal, then we can go into that higher state of consciousness. And that then impacts everyone around us and impacts the collective consciousness.
And the earth herself, all the animals, it really affects everything. It's a wave, right? It goes out and we feel it. And the more you tune into that, isn't that amazing? The more you tune into that, the more you're like, whoa, all these strands of beings. And, I go back to fun because I love having fun. It is. Yeah.
Well, and I think the earth herself is in a process of transformation
Yeah.
right now. So
Yeah.
we are needing to be, and she's calling us into it with her. So, but as we're in that process, are there any animals in particular that you think of can be really important guides to us in this transformational time?
That's a good question. My old friends, the polar bears, because they speak to dreaming. And I think polar bears really, and whales, really invite us to dream with them, to dream large and to be more consciously aware. Maybe that means lucid. Maybe that just means being more present to our dreams and pulling those up. I think there are other animals that are working in amazing ways,
Mhm.
healing individuals. Even well, I'm not saying even, I shouldn't even say that. Dogs and cats, the animals that live with
Mm.
us, are doing, a lot of work on helping us be more aware. And, I do animal communication talks, and I've noticed a huge shift these last couple of years to people who are not calling about how do I get my dog to stop barking to, what is it that I need to know about my dog? How does my dog want to be in
Mm.
relationship with me? How can I expand this? How can I?
Wow,
So it's
beautiful.
a
More of a
different,
relationship.
it's more questions like that. Yeah. And, just like there's really no such thing as a shadow animal, right? Humans make shadow animals by our projections on them. And every animal has its shadow as well, right? Just like humans, we all have our shadows as well. So where am I going with this? Just to circle around to say that, what animal speaks to you? What I always like to do it on the individual level to start. Where are you in your consciousness? What animal really speaks to you for healing? Is it snake? Is it elevating, energies and transforming? Is it just being with my dog or my cat or my horse? There's so many animals. I think birds, messages, right, from the divine,
Mhm.
from other places. So maybe that's your jam, right? Listening to messages and connecting in distant ways. I'm going like this because it's reminding me of very third eye kind of work, right? So what is it? What is it? Dolphins and manatees. I love manatees and that kind of energetic. I swam with manatees once way, way back in the day, and I felt this pulse that they put out on the rivers, just this
Mm.
really grounded, loving presence, so gentle. So we could speak for a couple hours at least on this.
Yes, well, and I so agree with you that the animals are really trying to heal us and help us.
Yeah.
And the more we pay attention to them, the more in balance we will be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also feel like, that whole way of working shamanically is really powerful too, that we each have an animal guide that reflects some aspect of ourselves that we really need to more fully align with and claim. So again, as we can remember how connected we are with these animals and their spirits and their consciousness,
Yeah.
then we can come back into more balance and wholeness.
Right. And that's kind of another good, really answer aspect of that question, which is, who are your animal teachers, either on the inner or the outer or the other dimensional? And really, and I think this is a good practice, really studying with those teachers, that particular teacher. Sometimes we have many, right? And being present and being committed, I think. I had a thing with cat. Cat was a shadow animal for me when I was very young, and then in college, I dreamed of cat, and cat was very patient with me, and I grew with cat, and cat became this incredible ally with intuition, with presence. Cat really wanted me to develop a cat attitude at times, which I could pull out. So but what does it require? It requires us showing up. It doesn't require us getting a book saying, oh, cat means this. No, it requires us being very present to the cat within us, or the cat teacher within us, or dolphin, whale, whatever. And learning for ourselves. I think we need to shift away from the answers being out there to kind of looking deeper about the answers that are within us and really bringing that up. And yes, it requires a little bit of work. And yes, it requires being present in a very deep way. But those are the riches, huh? Those are the riches. So there we go.
Beautifully said. That's a beautiful note to end on. And I think talking, as you're saying, about finding those relationships and connections with the animals within, but also being in more full honoring of them in our relationships with them as part of, our earth community. So it's all about coming back into relationship.
Yeah, and I think in ourselves too, honoring ourselves as well. And that's the one thing a lot of animal teachers would tell me is, sometimes I would get into that student role and want them to tell me things. And they're like, well, tell us about this. And I realized that relational thing is so important because we humans do have gifts. We do have things that I think some animals do want to know. And again, that's what opens up that relationship aspect, right? And that it's like a portal, huh? Where we can merge consciousness, and then we go into the hybrids. We become right. I mean, you understand at that point why you have a goat god or a snake god, and what those things are, because those are aspects of us, our divine self, our animal self. In a very in our human self too. So yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for being in this conversation, and thank you for writing this amazing book.
Oh, thank you, Heather. And I just want to thank you for doing these. I mean, I listen to a lot of your YouTube videos, and you always bring such presence, and you have a good ability, I feel, to bring wisdom out of other people. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank all of you for listening.